How often do you hear the phrase, all cars look the same these days? I think some of my viewers will agree. And although I beg to differ, that's a story for another video for another time, I am on a little crusade lately to try and find cars that look suspiciously similar. The name of the game is coincidence. Sure, every car maker likes to look at his neighbor for some inspiration, and then there are some general design trends that car makers adopt and put their own spin on it. Think of the horizontal taillight bar. But we are looking for cars that are in no way, or for the most part, not related to each other. Cars that really have their own unique design language, but somehow look oddly similar. Cars that are seemingly unrelated until you see them parked next to each other, and that makes you think, maybe I should not have had that extra double martini at dinner. To try and find these cars, we play this game by 3 rules. Rule number 1, no rebadged cars. Before you scream in the comments that yes, a Mitsubishi Colt does look oddly similar like a Renault Clio, you should realize that these are rebadged cars. Effectively the same car, but with a different badge. Rule number 2, no cars that actually share parts. Think of some low-volume super sports cars using lights or other bits of regular production cars. Think of the Jaguar XJ220 adopting the Rover 200 taillights. And rule number 3, no Chinese copycat cars. They are considered the low-hanging fruit of this exercise. We all know that Chinese car makers blatantly used to copy Western car designs, so it's all too easy to just point them out. That being said, I think the rest of this video will be something like a slideshow of cars that I believe are oddly similar. And I hope you will either be surprised or that your ideas of similar-looking cars gets confirmed. If not, let me know in the comments what cars you think are similar. Here we go. For starters, let's do a little warm-up. Remember when I said that many cars put their own spin on general car design trends? Well, here is something you might have noticed or missed. It can be best described as what I like to call as the awning-style taillights, where the taillights more or less fold over the rear end. And this is the shape right here. This is what I mean, is what I'm talking about. Many cars have adopted this style. Don't believe me? The Fiat Tipo, the Skoda Kushaq, the Opel Grandland, the Opel Astra, the Chinese Coros 7, the Maserati Quattroporte, the Lincoln Zephyr, Volkswagen Golf, Volkswagen Tiguan, the Buick Enclave, the Buick Envision, the Honda Civic, the Fisker Karma, the Toyota Grand Highlander, the Toyota RAV4, and last but not least, the Ford Kuga. Last time I checked, here are already 16 examples that follow this style, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are many more out there. And what about vertical taillights? The 1993 Volvo 850 station wagon is by many regarded as one of the first cars to introduce the full-length vertical taillights. And this approach has remained a Volvo thing all the way until the present day on its SUVs and crossover models. But in the meantime, there are quite a few cars that have certainly taken inspiration from this approach, namely Honda with their CR-V and HR-V models. And here is where it gets interesting. If Volvo introduced this style in 1993, Honda adopted this approach on their 1999 HR-V and 2001 CR-V models. And also Mitsubishi stepped into the game with their Lancer station wagon for the 2000 model year, and the rear end is almost identical to some of Volvo's station wagons. And this thing keeps going on. In 2002, Volvo released their first SUV, the XC90, with the iconic full-length taillights that follow the curves of the rear end. This car was joined by the smaller XC60 in 2008 and the compact hatchback V40 in 2012. These 3 cars feature variations of the Volvo taillight concept, and all have in common that the taillights follow the body lines and point upwards to the roof of the car in a straight line. But once again, the 2012 Honda CR-V looks to be heavily inspired by the 2008 Volvo XC60, and the same can be said about the recent generation XC60 and CR-V. And then there are the Nissan Leaf, the Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross, and the Suzuki Ertiga that are heavily inspired by the Volvo V40. And also last but not least, Volvo XC90's taillight design seems to be an inspiration for the 2022 Dacia Jogger and the Indian 2022 Mahindra Scorpio N. And so there are quite a few other styling sisters out there when it comes to taillight design, sometimes leading to rather unusual combinations. What about the French flagship of Renault, the Talisman sedan that looks awfully similar to that American flagship, the Lincoln Continental? But it's not that all mid-market and lower-priced cars like to take styling cues from the more expensive car makers, like the Australian Ford Falcon looking like a Jaguar XF. No, there are some legendary luxury car brands that just like to blatantly copy the design of cheap cars. Think of the Maserati Quattroporte, copying the design of the Daewoo Nubira. Look it up, the Nubira was earlier than the Quattroporte. Or what about Mercedes, taking a heavy dose of inspiration for their E-Class coupe from the Renault Laguna coupe? Especially Honda, we're getting back at that again, seems to either be the predator or the prey when it comes to copying the design of others or being copied by others. Think of the Honda City, that looks a lot like the BMW 3 Series. Or the mid-2000s Honda Civic, looking a lot like a mid-2000s Audi A4 station wagon. And maybe the best of all the examples I show you in this video, the 2013 Honda Accord is almost identical to the 2009 Hyundai Genesis, and I mean identical. Take a look. The way the taillights are shaped, the choice to put the white glass turning signals and reverse lights on top of the red taillights, the little chrome strip between them, and just the whole rear quarter panel and rear end design, including the C-pillar sweep. I consider this example one of the best in the industry. But let's turn it up a notch, because what I showed you are just dubious doppelgangers. But what if I told you you can also find triplets or even quadruplets? I present the styling trend of the mid-2000s, as demonstrated here by the 2003 Ford Focus sedan, the 2004 Chevrolet Epica, the 2005 Honda Civic Coupe, and last but not least, the 2006 Subaru Legacy. Isn't that amazing? Now, all the cars that I have showed you in this video all have one thing in common. It's their rear end design, and especially their taillight design, that is very similar. When it comes to the front end design, things get a lot tougher to compare, or really they are more diverse, so I don't really have many examples. But the Toyota Crown Sport and the Ferrari Purosangue look awfully similar, blurring the lines of when a car has mundane middle-class looks and when it looks like a super fast exotic sports car. And the same can be said, but then the other way around, about cars like the Maserati Grecale SUV that looks a lot like the Ford Puma crossover. But you know what? If you think that only today's cars look the same, think again. In the 1980s, you could buy a Peugeot 308 that looks a lot like a Ford Del Rey, that looks a lot like a Audi 100, that looks a lot like a Fiat 130, that looks a lot like a BMW 5 Series, that looks a lot like a Toyota Crown. And if we go even further back into history, you'll find some great-looking lookalikes, like the 1960s AMC Ambassador and the South American Simca Esplanada, or the British Austin Westminster taking it up against the near-identical French Peugeot 404. And last but not least, the Volvo Amazon, taking design inspiration from the Chrysler 300 Leather series. And then I haven't even started to talk about every single 1930s cars that looked exactly the same. So no, cars weren't really all that different in the good old days back then. Remember that the next time you like to go on another nostalgia-full trip down memory lane. I hope I've enlightened you a bit more with this video, and I have a lot more examples in my library, but it would be tiring to show you everything. In this video alone, I've only mentioned over 60 cars that look suspiciously similar, and I think that's a great start. I hope I have confirmed some of your ideas about cars looking almost identical, and if I don't, then let me know in the comments of what cars you think look pretty much the same.